Thanks, Melissa. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Chevy Chase Small Area Planning Community Design Workshop. Adam, if you can move slide to next. Thanks. So this morning, we're I'm gonna cover the program with you. So first, we're in our sort of welcome session where everybody's joining right now. We have over 100 people so far joined, so that's great, and more are kind of coming in. We're going to be going through a presentation first with everyone together. It's going to be about 30 minutes. I'm going to start, and then I'm going to hand it over to our consultant, Cunningham Cole Architects, who are going to take us through the urban design strategy. But I'm going to start us off with a little bit of background on the small area plan and sort of where we've come so far. As mentioned, this is going to be an interactive day. We're going to have breakout groups. We have about over a dozen Office of Planning and Cunningham Cole staff who will be facilitating those groups. And we're going to walk through a couple minutes about sort of what we're going to be doing and looking at in that session. We want to have plenty of time for that. So it's going to be about an hour where we're in our groups. And then we'll come back at the end and talk a little bit about next steps and the small area plan process. Thanks, Adam. So first, as I mentioned, we have a big group today that's helping to manage this meeting. We have about 10 folks from the Office of Planning, including myself and Heba El-Gawish, who you all have probably interacted with at various points online or in person in the Chevy Chase community. But we also have a lot of folks from our Urban Design Division, our Historic Preservation Division, and Development Review as well, who are helping us to facilitate. Jamal, who sort of kicked us off at the beginning, works with Link Strategic Partners. They have a large team here today helping us manage the Zoom and helping with any sort of technical or other issues that are going on, and will be helping to MC this meeting. So you might see those folks popping in and out of your breakout groups as well. And then we also have Cunningham Cole Architects, who will be leading a big portion of this presentation and will be helping us with facilitating the breakout rooms as well. Thanks. And so wanted to give you all just a little bit of background on the small area plan. I know many folks who are participating today. I've seen some familiar names, have joined us on many of our past engagements and activities so far. But the small area plan, for those who are maybe new to this process, will be a guiding vision for inclusive growth, really with a focus on the built environment along the Connecticut Avenue corridor in Chevy Chase, focusing on the blocks from Livingston Street north to Chevy Chase Circle. That's really what we're going to be focusing today. And we're going to be focusing on urban design and buildings and the experience at the street of how this neighborhood works today and how it could work in the future with some changes to accommodate some bigger buildings and more housing. As the small area plan is one of many projects that we're working on, I think it's helpful to contextualize for folks. We often get questions like, well, why are we working in Chevy Chase? What's happening in Friendship Heights? What about down in Cleveland Park? And so our office is actively engaged across Ward 3 and across the city doing planning. Our efforts and our focus, particularly in the area we call Rock Creek West, which is Ward 3, has been focused on achieving our ambitious housing goals and particularly affordable housing goals for this part of the city where we haven't seen a lot of affordable housing or housing built in recent decades, along with the growth that the city's seen. And I wanted to just flag this document for folks, which was released in December. It's called the Rock Creek West Roadmap, and it was released actually in Chevy Chase to a large group outside the community center and library, where the mayor spoke about the opportunities to help us meet these goals in this part of the city, which are not just planning, they're related to housing finance and the private sector and community groups, and how we all need to work together to try to reach these goals for greater housing equity in the district. And the reason why that meeting was really held there outside the community center and library is because that is an important site as part of this planning process, where we're going to be looking at contributions to housing and affordable housing in the Chevy Chase community. Thanks. So in terms of where we are in this process so far, as I mentioned, we're really just giving a brief overview of the small area plan process. All of the information that we're sharing here is on the project webpage. But in terms of timeline and where we are today, the project kicked off in March. We had a big meeting. I think a lot of folks who are here today were probably in that meeting. And we've had, and so since then, we went through a visioning session in the spring and summer. And we had a survey online where we received over 500 responses, and we did 4 sort of workshops where we had small breakout groups talking about concepts, talking about what people value in this community and what they would like to see as it continues to change and grow in the future. From that process, we developed our draft vision and goals document, which we shared around the community at Chevy Chase Day in September, and again online, and heard a lot of helpful feedback around what people, how people saw those vision and goals articulated. And then leading up to this workshop today, we held 3 really great, well-attended community walks in November and December, where we talked a little bit about the community while we were out on the sidewalk, out in the street, outside buildings, in public space. And this workshop today is really informed by all of that work so far, and be looking a little bit at sort of visualizing how some of the change could help to meet and achieve those vision and goals moving forward. And then ultimately, a small area plan goes to council. And, but before that happens, we're developing a draft plan this spring, which will culminate in a mayoral hearing as well. And so there's still quite a bit of process left, but I wanted everyone to be kind of oriented as to where we are today and where we're heading moving forward. As I mentioned, as part of our engagement process so far, we developed draft vision and goals. And really these cover 6 interrelated themes that are, really came out of what we heard in the community. And these are the 6 themes. And, the first one really starts with people. And, what we heard is sort of the small town feel, or the friendly social nature of this community, and the tight-knit networks that exist today. And really enhancing and amplifying that into the future and growing that table. The second one is about an inclusive built environment. So thinking about buildings and change in the future and how that can accommodate new and different kinds of households and people as the city and the neighborhood grows. The third is a reimagined civic core. This is the sort of a community center and library property, the district owned property, which many of you know is slated for reconstruction and redevelopment by DCPL and Parks and Recreation, and thinking about incorporating a housing component there. The fourth is an equitable housing strategy. Again, really thinking about all the different ways that we can achieve our housing goals on this corridor and in the community. And also a thriving retail corridor. I mean, I think one of the things we hear all the time, and I think there's some questions in the chat about it, is what about the businesses? What about the small businesses in the neighborhood? And these are really important to the community, really important to us, and ensuring that they can be sustainable into the future. Even recognizing challenges that existed before the pandemic and new challenges that our business has experienced during the pandemic. And then finally, how people get around in the community, recognizing that we have the demographics in this community that are at the younger and at the older end of the spectrum, and ensuring that we have safe and sustainable ways that everybody are able to get around, particularly folks who are perhaps more vulnerable. So that's a lot, it's a lot of different topics, and sort of how does that translate into urban design, and how does that translate into the built environment is really the focus of our workshop today. And when we started to think about this, and from our conversations in the community, we've broken down this part of the corridor into these sort of 4, what we're calling 4 character areas. And so starting from the north, starting from Chevy Chase Circle coming down is really the gateway, the arrival into the district from Maryland along Connecticut Avenue, and thinking about sort of what that means, how that feels, what that looks like for everybody, for pedestrians, for people biking, driving, all of that. The civic core, as I mentioned earlier, really important, the sort of the heart and soul of this community, if you will, which is the library and community center property, and thinking about the co-location and future of that property moving forward. And then the corridor itself, the commercial corridor itself, sort of broken into the west side and the east side, recognizing that they have very different ways that they function and behave and feel today, and thinking about ways of amplifying all the positive attributes that exist on the older west side, and expanding those on the east side as perhaps larger redevelopment might happen in the future. And as we're talking about, buildings and future development, we get this question a lot, and so we always want to make sure we're covering it in our material. Being clear on sort of what the size and scale of some of those buildings might be in the future. In this area that we're talking about on Connecticut Avenue, the mixed use area in particular, those 4 blocks, are buildings up to about 50 to 65 feet. And so the graphic that you guys are seeing here kind of shows 3 different kinds of development that exist in the community today. There are the lower density residential, the houses on the side streets, which are up to about 40 feet. There are, on the far right, we have our bigger apartment buildings, which exist further south on Connecticut Avenue, south of Livingston, which are up to about 90 feet. And the commercial area today, the buildings range between sort of 20 to 40 feet today. And so the idea is to allow them to grow a little bit bigger into the future to allow for new housing on top and renovated or expanded commercial space on the ground floor. And so that blue is sort of the increment of change that could exist with new development along those 4 blocks of the commercial area. And so with that, I'm going to hand it off to Lee Quill from Cunningham Quill to talk a little bit about going from the 2-dimensional to the 3-dimensional and visualizing sort of what that change might look like in specific places along the corridor.
Great, thank you, Erican. Good morning, everyone. My name again is Lee Quill from Cunningham Quill Architects. Joining me today from our group is Nandor Mitrasak, Adam Chamey, and David Otenyo, and they'll be speaking in just a moment. We're sorry we can't be with you in person this morning. We're looking forward to seeing a lot of you again. We did have that opening in some of the tours when we were on the tour in November to be with you, but this is good. We have a wonderful turnout today, so thank you. After months of discussions with OP, what we were participating in on the tours, etc., the teams got together, OP and our group got together to decide how best to visualize some of the potential redevelopment opportunities that may happen in this particular corridor. So rather than select every site that may or potentially could redevelop or be asked to be developed, we selected a few selected sites to take a look at, to share with you visually how they might go in redevelopment. We'll be looking at massing diagrams to show how the height and the mass and how the relationship to the adjacent single-family neighborhoods and streets will occur. They are diagrams that will show a potential way of developing a site. There will be many different ways of developing. Each one of these sites would be going through a process of interaction with the community. So these are ideas just to give you some idea to spur discussion today. And they are, again, these are just a few of the opportunity sites, so we can talk about the different activities both on the east and the west. Next slide, if you can go. We're looking at the existing structures right now along here, and some of the sites that allow themselves for development and some that don't. Next slide. As you look at the framework for this particular area, there's a finer grain network, as you know, of buildings and storefronts and pedestrian realm on the west side, and less so on the east. So we need to think about how that can happen on both sides despite the change in scale. But we want the west side to continually to inform what happens on both sides of this corridor of Connecticut Avenue and ultimately help shape the final design and street level interactions and feel of the retail in these areas. Next. So as we look at this, development will occur. We're going to be showing you how it works on a number of these sites, and then we'll show a composite. There are two opportunities here. One is a matter of right, which would take any new development in this area up to 50 feet, and then there would be a PUD height up to 65, and there's a potential for a penthouse on top at a 1-to-1 setback. But again, it will be incremental. It will not be all at once. We're showing you where the heights could occur here, but this will not occur all at once. In fact, some sites will not develop probably at all, but especially some of the finer grain sites. But we did want to show you how it can occur here, but not to worry that it'll happen all at once. It'll happen incrementally on a site-by-site basis, and it'll be by particular developers as they come in and say, well, we want to take a look at it. We do know that the site by the city will be one of the ones that will be looked at fairly soon, with RFP coming out, for the co-location of the civic uses. Next. So I'd like to turn it over to David now to kind of take you through the first group of sites, being the gateway opportunity sites coming off the circle. David?
Yes, so these sites are as established as the gateway in the vision plan. And basically, as you're coming from Maryland, this is the first threshold for the neighborhood that establishes Chevy Chase as a neighborhood. And we were thinking these sites are really strategic for creating that sense of what Chevy Chase is. And they're kind of like, you could have some landmark buildings and establish that character around the circle as you're entering from Maryland. So we're actually, could you have the next slide? Sorry. So this is the view coming in from Maryland at the DC line. Chevy Chase Circle is to the bottom right of the site. And so we're looking at the Long and Foster, which is the building to the bottom right on the circle. That could be a signature building that kind of establishes the character and frames that opening along with the existing church tower. And you could have similar architectural features that kind of announce that gateway as you're entering DC from Maryland. Next slide. We're also looking at the WMATA, which is an existing bus drop-off. We're looking at potentially creating that as a plaza, possibly a curbless design. It would be maintained as a bus drop-off as it is today, but we're looking at ways that we could activate that circle, that bus drop-off. Maybe something similar to Eastern Market. You could have a market on weekends, potentially vendors set up in that area, and then flanking that with mixed-use buildings, residential above with retail or some active use on the ground floor. And then on the Wells Fargo site to the left, there's a similar potential for mixed-use development, and we'd be looking to incorporate a similar streetscape to what currently exists on the east side. I'm sorry, as the west side, with that fine grain character and streetscape and trees. We would be looking to replicate something similar on the new development, potentially that could occur on a Wells Fargo site. Next slide. So this is illustrating at the by right 50-foot height, a mixed use development with ground floor retail along Connecticut Avenue, and kind of showing those architectural elements that could occur flanking Chevy Chase Circle. And then on the left, the building on the left on the Wells Fargo site also participates in that gateway experience. So you could have another architectural element on the corner of that building. And we're also looking at feathering the density down as you move to the residential single family neighborhood, trying to be respectful of the height as you move off of Connecticut and feather down into the neighborhood. This is showing the 65 potential height limit that would be under the PUD process. And of course, that would go through community engagement, and community would have some say in how that would develop. And also getting your feedback, similar to the other plan, we're showing penthouses because those would exceed, those would be able to go above the 65 height limit. And I'm sorry. I'm going to pass it off to Adam, my colleague.
Hi, everyone. My name is Adam Chamey from Cunningham Quill Architects, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that kind of western side of Chevy Chase corridor. You know, in your visioning statements, the draft visioning statements, you really express the idea that these buildings are really the heart of the community right now. And as this area develops, and as new buildings or new complementary uses come in, that they need to reflect those historic assets and that character of the neighborhood. And, you know, that's really critical on this western part of the strip, where there are very limited opportunities, I think our team found, for you know, large scale developments or changes over time. That fine grained mix in all likelihood will stay for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years. But there are a few sites, few opportunity areas where maybe there can be new thoughtful mixed use, new opportunities for housing or retail along the corridor. Specifically, you see on the screen, you know, we decided to hone in on one specific site behind the PNC Bank. It's currently a parking lot. It's along the corridor, and it's a relatively empty, underused stretch between the, you know, the great residential neighborhoods and the corridor. And so, you know, a great opportunity site for a very sensitive, complementary new buildings coming in, and we could envision that over time. So this is an overall view of that western stretch, and you can see that parking lot to the rear of the PNC building, and then you can see the single family homes, usually about 3 to 4 stories above. And this is another view of that opportunity site that we're highlighting. Just as an example, there's other parking lots and other areas behind the western corridor that are similar. And you know, when we were honing in on this specific site and along this corridor, the west side of the street, as I said before, is your character, is your thriving retail corridor now. But one of the great opportunities is for tactical retrofit of these buildings to help retail thrive over time and grow over time. And then as these new opportunity sites, and as the, you know, you have the adaptive reuse of these historic and existing buildings, you have better opportunities and new opportunities for better lighting, seating, outdoor elements as new retail and new uses come in. So similar to what David shared, this is an example of that 50 feet by right development. You know, imagine the PNC owner comes in and wants to do something with that parking lot. This is, you know, from our perspective, what they may propose. This is, you know, it could be any number of changes, but one of the ideas is that with some sort of change in this use, you maybe could reactivate that storefront and maybe activate even the roof, depending on what type of ground floor uses are used. Maybe it's a restaurant, maybe it stays a bank, maybe it becomes a better retail use, but something to celebrate these great buildings along the retail stretch. We also looked, you know, in the parking lot, the transformation into a larger, perhaps residential, perhaps mixed use building that would fit within this currently vacant site, but then really respectfully step down to be at the same height as the single family homes adjacent and have a strong green buffer to complement the green leafy residential neighborhoods adjacent. Here's an example of what that might look like at a 65 feet height. This would be through a PUD process, through neighborhood engagement, through work with the community. But you could imagine, flipping between these two, a kind of a smaller, an additional floor added. And, one benefit of that would be an increase in units, maybe in size of units. It's really hard to understand how a specific builder or architect may approach this, but maybe family size units, maybe a different sort of ground floor use that maybe needs to be two stories tall. And, along with this, it would give more ability for the owner to bring more improvements to the streetscape, perhaps do a different sort of ground floor use. And then we wanted to share a kind of third example of how a specific architect or builder might approach this for your feedback and see what your thoughts are. They may say, hey, this retrofit of the existing building would be even better activated if we could add additional floors above. And, looking at your visioning statements, looking at the concerns about sensitivity, this would, from an urban design perspective, it would be critical to step back any sort of upper floors from the main street, but then also allow maybe, if it was a restaurant, maybe somebody could use that second floor and start to activate the roof as rooftop seating, or, you could imagine suddenly other opportunities and other uses could suddenly come into play. And an additional, one of the great visioning statements was about equity and providing more housing. This would also, perhaps offer that opportunity. So this is an example from Capitol Hill of, and don't get too attached to these images. This is just an example, but of other parts of the city of how people have approached neighborhoods with great historic and great existing fabric and new buildings very added behind. So they added, new housing above. They stepped back from the upper floors. So when you're walking down the street, you really don't see it. You had to step back pretty far in this picture to see this. And then really protecting, retaining, and allowing existing buildings to thrive and be renovated in a way that respects that existing character. And then part of renovations like this, there's often a new activation and improvement of the streetscape to bring those amenities that really are needed along the corridor. The second kind of opportunity areas, of course, Erican spoke about before, is the east side. And, unlike the west side, where there's really limited opportunities for larger change, it's really a lot more about protecting and retaining those existing assets to the community. On the east side, you have a lot more larger parcels, which you could imagine maybe are much more feasible for somebody to be interested in redeveloping over time. And this was also part of the community vision. Your draft community vision spoke about more residential development and increased commerce on the east side to kind of reflect this awesome character you already have. You also talked about exploring design options that can kind of bring a street level activation of these building facades to support the commercial main street. Often retail spaces and retail main streets work best when you have something on both sides of the street, when you have complementary uses that can kind of give you a sense of arrival and a sense of cross shopping in a more practical way. So the site that we decided to hone in on, and that whole western stretch, there's a lot of great opportunity areas, was the Safeway. This is one that specifically is really important to the community to retain as a grocery store and as a retail use, but maybe isn't working as well as it could be now. So this is the aerial view. You can see there's a large parking lot. You have kind of a one-story, you're very familiar with your one-story grocery store use, and this is another view of that site kind of in a more diagrammatic way with the strengths of the parcel. It's a large parcel, best condition to support mixed use buildings, unlike on the western side where that really is a lot more difficult. You also have, with this new zoning, opportunities to allow taller buildings to sort of start to complement actually the apartments to the south, and to maybe bring in more residents that can start to really shop at these businesses. As well as your equity goals of finding more affordable housing. So once again, this is that example we showed before of a by right 50 feet high development. This could be what it looks like. We thought about, maybe it's a modernized grocery store at the ground floor, And then part of that redevelopment, you get a better streetscape that can really be activated. And parking would most likely be underground, as is the case in most grocery stores and other parts of the city that have been redeveloped. We imagine, you have a great green buffer of trees right now, but you could enhance that to make it a better neighbor to
the who's calling
neighborhood. And like the western side, we really were interested in creating building step downs to the neighbor to really, ease into that and feather into that residential usage. And I think that would be something as urban designers, and I think you as a community would be interested in. This is an example of that planned unit development, 65 feet height. Maybe you come in with community benefits to say, hey, we're really interested in equity, maybe we're interested in a specific streetscape enhancement. And so you add, with the 65-foot height, you basically get one more floor to the building. And, once again, I think we were, as urban designers, still interested in keeping that green buffer and keeping a step down to the neighbors where the height may be adjacent to those single family homes were similar in this diagram. And then this slide kind of speaks to that character. What would a redeveloped grocery store use start to look like? I think it would start to have a better streetscape and storefront that maybe would start to tackle some sustainability goals or tackle some, or also more glass, more open, more inviting feelings with signage and better lighting. And you could also imagine, to the image to the right, maybe some housing above a couple of stories that could start to bring residences to really shop and activate those to help support the retail along the corridor, and then also provide a variety of new different housing to meet the citywide goals. I'm going to pass this off to Nandor, who's going to discuss the civic core and the reimagining of those spaces.
Thank you, Adam. Pleasure to meet with you all today. My name is Nandor Mitrosak. I'm an architect and urban designer with Cunningham Quill. So we took a deep dive into kind of the draft community visions for the civic core, and this site includes the current library and the community center, along with the basketball court and the playground and the parking at the rear of the site. And I've really kind of looked at and reviewed, and there's a diversity of opinions on the use of the site today and how it could change in the future. I think the DC team has expressed, this is a future redevelopment site, updated public facilities, and it really represents a great opportunity for the community. Next slide. When we look at the site today, it's almost 2 acres. It's a really it's in the center of the community. It has public uses. It's well attended from what we saw during the site walks and just kind of our notes. When we walked around with the community, we were taking in notes about the character of these buildings and how they're used today. I think we observed a lot of use of the playground with the kids. A lot of kids biking past the site, either in the street or on the sidewalks. The buildings are set back and don't really kind of engage the street currently with design. You can see all the entrances to the buildings are kind of internal to the site. We did hear some observations from the community that, this block feels a little bit dead as opposed to across the street, especially with the setbacks and kind of the inward facing nature of the site. So as this site redevelops and the city is looking for all the input from the community and and we're going to listen to you all today, how we can reimagine these buildings and functions. We're interested in the engagement with Connecticut Avenue, with Northampton Street and McKinley Street, and how we can reimagine these elements. Next slide. This is a diagram showing it today. Next slide. So one option, and this is kind of the first kind of simple option that we thought of, is maybe we co-locate the library and the community center together into a civic building that fronts Connecticut Avenue. It's a public facility. It captures the corners of both major streets, and really maybe we embellish it with architecture and has this kind of strong presence on the corner. And then we have an opportunity kind of in between as we, go from this public facing uses to, to the residential single family neighborhood. We have an opportunity for housing. And, I think we know the background market and kind of the history of Chevy Chase, and there really hasn't been new housing in this corridor in decades. This is a great opportunity. This is a city-owned site. There's a lot of public input and a lot of opportunity for the community to kind of weigh in on this site. So this presents a perfect opportunity to add affordable housing or mixed income housing. Maybe there's a need for senior housing within the community. These are all options that we're looking forward to hearing from you all. This particular design kind of looks at a central courtyard. Maybe this is where some of these recreational facilities or the playground, community outdoor space could be located. And then we have this new housing kind of stepping down in density. There'll be horizontal and kind of vertical step backs as we get closer to the neighborhood. It is important to note, we observed that the topography helps us here where it's dropping down towards Connecticut Avenue. So I think the adjacent houses are a story higher or a story and a half higher. So I think we can kind of work with the topography here and look at this new housing. Next slide. Another way to do is keeping the library and the community center separate as separate buildings. And we have this kind of collection of courtyard spaces around the residential, around the community center and the library. And again, trying to engage Connecticut Avenue a little bit better, engage the corners, have some presence. Maybe we have inviting kind of corner entrances for these civic buildings. And then we can program these outdoor spaces with things like playgrounds or tranquil spaces or landscape spaces. And then again, this housing can kind of help step down from Connecticut Avenue down to kind of the edges of the site. Or imagining, maybe these rooftops or green roofs, or there's a lot of flexibility with this program and what it can be. Next slide. Another example that we've seen in other communities and other places around the nation is kind of stacking or kind of co-hosting different uses. So this is a scheme where we looked at a library capturing the corner of Connecticut and McKinley. Then the community center captures the other corner, and we have kind of this outdoor public courtyard facing Connecticut Avenue. And then we have housing on top. So this is kind of an interesting where we have a vertical integration. And then we have this housing kind of tapering down towards the neighborhood. We have maybe this recreational space in between the neighborhood, kind of a pocket park or some kind of maybe it could be landscaped. But in any case, this is just another take on how this civic core block could be reimagined. And again, like we've mentioned, these aren't final designs. This is not, we're just kind of showing a multiple of options to you all to get your input, and just kind of thinking about things like streetscape, corners, massing, and kind of these program elements and how they may shift and kind of move across the site. We're really excited about the site. This represents a fantastic opportunity for the community to achieve a lot of the goals that we've read in the community visioning, and we look forward to hearing from you all on that. Next slide. This is an example of a co-located site in Chicago. Again, I wouldn't read too much into this image. This is kind of an example of a library capturing the corner, having some more openness and presence to the street, some housing on top. This could be rendered in more traditional architecture, in other contexts. But we just wanted to kind of show an example of like this vertical integration of different uses. Next slide. So zooming back out to the corridor, I just want to kind of remind us and remind everyone that this is thinking about the future. This is not going to happen, next year or 5 years or even 10 years. This is kind of thinking far into the future on a 20, 30-year time frame, and thinking about how this corridor is going to evolve. Again, it's a very important part of the city. The city owns significant investments here. There's a lot of great opportunities, as we've seen today, and this will be incremental. It'll change over time, year by year and decade by decade, and we want to keep mindful of the kind of the bigger vision here. Next slide. So, this is what it is today. If we took a collection of everything we showed you today and kind of built out this corridor, next slide, you can kind of see how this may change over time. It's gonna Connecticut Avenue will have this kind of gateway, as David talked about. The civic core will change and evolve over time. And maybe some of these historic properties may infill and develop, and the Safeway site certainly is a good opportunity as well. So, over time, over this time frame, we'd like to kind of get your input on how Chevy Chase and this community core is gonna evolve. Okay, I'm gonna hand this over back to Jamal and Link and talk about the breakout rooms.
Thanks, Nandor, and your colleagues. So this is Erkin again from OP, and we're going to be heading into the breakout rooms in a couple minutes. I've noticed a lot of really healthy chat going on, a lot of conversation back and forth. So I think a lot of folks have specific ideas and thoughts they want to share, and so that's where we're going to be heading into the breakout rooms to do that. I did just want to mention a couple things based on some of the things that I was seeing in the chat, and just to help clarify that maybe we didn't mention from the outset. A lot of what we're showing you today and a lot of what we're talking about are development scenarios that are based on existing regulations and review processes. So the heights and the densities that we're talking about are things that have been approved in the recent comprehensive plan update last year by council. And so what we're talking through today and looking at today is how some of those changes could be visualized through different kinds of buildings in this community as we're trying to achieve different goals around housing and affordable housing production, ensuring there's plenty of new residents and neighbors to support neighborhood retail into the future, given its challenges, and just thinking about how this part of the city will continue to grow with the rest of the city. Changes have been made in the comprehensive plan across the whole city. This planning process is really just honed in on Chevy Chase to ensure that this community has an ability to think proactively about how change might happen organically and incrementally over several years and decades. There were some questions around sort of how development works and who owns the property and what happens next. And so anything that we're looking at today is really subject to future process, a zoning change, or a planned unit development that a property owner would have to initiate themselves and go through a process to change the zoning on their site, to build a new building of this height and scale. And so this planning process helps to provide a vision and guidance in advance of that when it might happen in the future. And so it's really just giving this community an opportunity to continue to change in future decades where in past decades, that opportunity really didn't exist. And so I did just want to talk a little bit about the breakout rooms, just to give everybody a bit of a heads up on sort of what we're doing and how we're going to be doing that. So as was mentioned earlier, we really want to have a more interactive and engaging opportunity for folks to share their comments. I will also mention that the chat that everybody's been engaging with so far will be captured, and we're going to try to respond to some specific questions if they haven't been answered already after the meeting next week. But we're going to be using a feature called Jamboard, which is a digital virtual whiteboard. You can see how it looks on the screen right now. And really, we're going to be using this sticky note feature, which gives you the ability to type a comment and post it onto the board in your breakout room. And our facilitators, we're going to be helping you and explaining that a little bit when you all go into your rooms. But we just wanted to let you know that's what we're going to be doing. And if you're not comfortable using it or you can't use it, that's fine. You'll be able to follow along and see the facilitator screen as well. And so if you go to the next slide, I think Jamal's going to walk us through some of the guidelines for our breakout rooms.
Yeah, thank you, Erkin. Again, we want to promote civil and respectful dialogue and dialogues in these breakout conversations. So here's just some of the guidelines that we want to share with you all as we're going into these conversations and deeper dialogues and discussions. As folks will get the opportunity to have more speaking time in these smaller breakout rooms and smaller participants. So breakout rule number one, enter a curiosity and ask clarifying questions. We're not expecting everyone here to be experts on this work. We want folks to be residents. Come here with questions and ask if you don't understand something that's being presented. It's okay to disagree respectfully and openly without being disagreeable. So that means don't necessarily point out or point out your fellow residents or shame a fellow resident for particular comment or feedback. Respectfully have an open dialogue around the particular feedback, and feel free to share some of your feedback as well to the Jamboards and to the conversation. Stay mentally and physically present. I know this is a lot to digest and a lot of information was just shared, and that's a lot to process. What we're asking for folks to do is bear with us through the breakout rooms and walk through the process slowly and stay present in a way where you can contribute effective feedback and efficient feedback in a way where it's conducive to the space. Make it a brave space. Fearlessly share ideas and ask questions. Again, we all must enter the space knowing that we're here to share feedback and not point fingers at any individual. Respect each other's thinking and value everyone's contributions. Speak in rough draft. We are all learners. Again, we're not expecting anybody to be experts or to have the fancy words together. It's okay to share in rough draft and say you may not understand something, but you want to add to the dialogue and conversation. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. So try to understand some of the information first, rather than continuously jumping in, as some of the conversations and slides in the Jamboard discussion breakout rooms may cover actually some of the concerns you may have. Attack the problem, not the person. And then we are all contributors to the entire process. And then lastly, always assume good intentions. We're fellow residents, and we always want to assume that we want the best for our community. Folks, I am going to put you all into breakout rooms. We're going to have about an hour, again, to take the time to dive in on these particular topics and discussions. So we'll open the breakout rooms and you'll automatically will be assigned with a facilitator and a note taker. So see you all back here in an hour.
Well, I had a great group. I know there was a lot of, I can imagine there's been a lot of great discussion today, and we really appreciate everybody coming out and taking some of their Saturday morning to talk with us about design and talk with us about the future of Chevy Chase. I wanted to use this time, I know we're a little over 12, so we'll be pretty quick, to talk a little bit about what's next and in following today and also in the process in general. So, the Jamboards that we were all using from the breakout rooms, we're going to be downloading those and posting those to the project webpage next week, along with the presentation recording and the slide deck that was shared earlier today. So folks will be able to take a look at that and see it, especially if folks weren't here today at the meeting. We have a survey that will be going up on the project webpage as well for 2 weeks, starting Monday. The survey is really going to be very similar to the questions and content that we shared in our breakout groups. So if folks were participating, but maybe didn't have a time to share or reflect on something later in the week that they wanted to share, that's a great opportunity for folks to weigh in and share their thoughts then. We're also encouraging you to share that with your friends and neighbors in the community so they have an opportunity to weigh in as well. And the survey will be posted on the project webpage front and center, which is publicinput.com/Chevy Chase. I also wanted to mention, we know there was like a lot of questions today and a lot of things that weren't necessarily about design or about the plan in general. And so we OP staff will be at the Chevy Chase Library for community office hours, 2 days, one next week and one the week after. So Thursday, January 27th, midday from 12:30 to 2:30, and Thursday, February 3rd in the evening from 5 to 7 p.m. So we really want to give an opportunity for folks to come talk to us, to ask us questions, not just about the design concepts, but about the plan in general. We saw a lot of questions about affordable housing, process to date, things like that. And all of what I'm sharing now, you'll all get an email kind of reminding you and pointing you to to that next week as well in terms of how to stay engaged. But I do just want to echo again, we really appreciate everybody's participation today. I mean, on our side, we had 20 or 22 folks across OP, Link, and Cunningham Quill to help manage this meeting, and we're really appreciative of everyone's time and contributions in the groups and in the meeting. I did also want to let folks know what happens next. So, you know, the design workshop and this design survey is part of the plan process. And ultimately, what we're hearing right now will inform how the design strategy is articulated in the draft plan, which we're hoping to have a public draft available later in the spring, in March. And so stay tuned for that as well. To reiterate and sort of recap, the small area plan ultimately goes to council for adoption. You know, a lot of the conversations I think in the groups were about sort of when things might happen or when change might occur. And it's really important to, I think, recognize that this planning process is really just the start. Any change, physical change in the neighborhood is really up to private property owners. In the city's case, there's already a process underway which will continue for the city-owned property, the Civic Core. But what this planning process is really intended to do is set a framework and some guidance and vision on how this neighborhood can continue to change, grow, and adapt over time in future years and decades. And so I think it's a helpful kind of place for us to leave. And with that, we're done for today. We tried to keep it to time. I hope I'm not forgetting anything else that I was supposed to mention. If I did, please, someone from Link or OP pipe up. And here's our contact information to stay in touch. You can email us anytime or visit the website for all the information I just described.
I think you shared everything. And for the folks making comments about the chat, our team is capturing everything that's in the chat. The jam boards will again be posted as well after, so folks can see other groups' comments from that. So thank you all and have a wonderful cold Saturday. I would say nice Saturday, but it's cold outside.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Great sessions. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, guys. It was great.
Thank you.